Please give a warm welcome to Jody.
Hi. It's really nice to see all of you, and I really appreciate you coming to hear what I have to say about near-death experience and a few other things. What I'm going to do, since this is really central to one of the things that I'm doing here, is I was going to tell you a little bit about the website. And actually, we have 3 websites, and they're all devoted to different aspects of consciousness. But I'll tell you a little bit about those. Those are the resources that are available to everyone. And it's a free public service to everybody. You can come and you can just read, you can participate, you can do as much or as little as you want. One of the things is that I wanted this to have a message because, you know, it's very uncertain out there in the world, and there's so much animosity, so much separation. And one of the things that I was trying to do is I wanted to give the message of hope to everybody, because it really is not what it seems, because the power belongs to us. And so that's one of the things that I wanted to talk about, since we are spiritual beings inhabiting a physical body. And so I wanted to just let everybody know that. But in the process of talking, I'm going to do a little experiment. And you don't have to participate if you don't want to. But if you do, it's going to show you something very interesting. And it will further, you'll be able to see what I'm talking about when you can see where the power really resides. So one of the things that I like to do is called a hug session. And I know, you know, that a lot of people, you don't have to participate if you don't want to. But one of the things is that I've done this before when I talk about soulmates. And it raises the vibration of the room, but it also does, it makes people feel so much good and so much connection. Because when you hug another person, you know, like for instance, you could go into church and you say, peace be with you. You know, it's kind of mechanical. I mean, how many people really say, peace be with you, look in their eyes, and really mean it? And so I like to call this hug after Lee Campbell. She's part of the Seattle IANDS, and she gives what I call the full meal deal of a hug. She doesn't just give you the pat on the back. You stand front, you know, you let your chakras line up, and you feel that love within yourself, and you share that with another person. And so then I'm going to show you what the experiment is. So everybody, if you don't have to participate if you don't want to, but it's a cool experiment. Come here, hug me.
All right,
hug me. There you go.
All right.
The full meal deal of hugs. There we go.
You get some feathers?
Oh, so good. I'm so glad you're here. Okay. Give me a hug. Oh, so glad.
Mike, hi, I'm you before. Abby, we're helping you. Hi. Sandy. Hi, Sandy. Hi. I'm so glad
Hello, I'm Michael.
Hi, Michael.
It's working fine now. Everything's working.
Oh, I had so much.
Hi, Michael.
Mary.
That was very nice.
I get 2 of them. 1, 2. Okay, first. Oh, very nice.
Hi, what's your name?
Carol.
Carol, I'm Michael.
Oh, thank you. This is what camaraderie is. This is what love is. This is what connection is. And so now that's
One more, why not? You give a good one.
Now see, notice how well does that make you feel? How does that make this whole experience for you? It does. It really has a tendency to just raise your vibration up. Now here's the experiment, okay? Everybody ready? Here's the experiment. Think of something nasty. Think of something mean. Can you do it? No. Oh, you can? Okay. There's always an exception. But see, the thing is when you are in this state of natural, pure love, you cannot, with the exception of one person, you cannot, you really can't think of the negative emotions. You can't get angry, you can't feel fear, because that is our natural state. That's where we come from. And so, whenever you feel a difficult moment or a difficult time, use this, think back on this experience and say, hey, my natural state is love. I don't have to feel this anger. I don't have to feel this hate. I don't have to feel any of these negative emotions because I am love. So, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk about the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation. And I've been the webmaster since 2002. I met Jeff in 1998. And then when I took over the websites, I went and gave it sort of a facelift. And he sort of did his thing, which was, he really was into the science of the near-death experience. And I was more into something a little bit different. And so it actually turned out to be beneficial because both of us were actually helping to raise the consciousness of the planet. And what you'll see here is we have, we're like 10 experiences short of having 3,900 experiences on the website. It is a tremendous resource. The other website that we have, one of the others, is called the After-Death Communication website. And the way that we define an after-death communication are more like those spontaneous communications that people get when somebody passes over to the other side and then they come back. So those are more of the spontaneous. And the mediumships are very different than the spontaneous. And I'm mentioning that because it's not that we're trying to exclude them or trying to put one class of experiences above another. It's just that we're trying to study them because that's what we do. People will come to the website, they fill out a form, and then we classify their experiences. And the next one is the Out-of-Body Experience Research Foundation. And what this website does is it takes all of the experiences that are not a near-death experience or an after-death communication, because we are very rich. We have a very rich spiritual heritage, and there's such a broad spectrum of spiritual experiences. And so, rather than only study just two, we decided that we would study all of them, but they go into the different websites just because it's easier for people to get the information that they're looking for. And here we have, well, oh, I know that. Just a minute. Okay, don't lean on. Okay, so what we have in this website has some really cool experiences. And we have like the spontaneous out-of-body experiences, which are very different than the meditation experiences or the out-of-body experiences of frequent flyers is what we call them. And then we have a class of experiences called spiritually transformative events. And I think that from what I was hearing, if people did not have a near-death experience, they actually sounded like they had had a spiritually transformative event, because otherwise it would not have motivated you to come here and to actually see and try to get some more understanding of what you went through. And so one of the things that happens is a lot of this is kind of nebulous. There's not any real definite, this happens, that happens. And so basically a spiritually transformative event is any kind of a spiritual event that just kind of moves a person towards their spirituality, you know, so that they are more open towards spirituality. And many people have had that experience. And we also have things that are, we call near-death-like experiences, which I think are actually a subset of the spiritually transformative event, because they have all the hallmarks of being a near-death experience, but the person does not die. But yet they still have all of the after effects and everything. So it's really hard to just classify experiences. But in our world, for some reason, science seems to rule, so you got to classify. We also have things called deathbed visions. We have some things, the power of prayer, healing, miracles. We have waking visions. We have the precognitive visions. We have all kinds of dream experiences. You just go on there, and everything is just remarkable. And then we even have a classification of other, and those usually have to do with angelic experiences and things like bilocation. Just tremendous, the amount of types of experiences that people report to us. Getting back to NDERF, now that you have kind of a flavor of all the types of things that we do and the types of experiences that we have, NDERF is really special because it has to do with the near-death experience, but even more than that, it's because it has such a wide reach worldwide. It is a global phenomenon, and we have so many people from all over the world, all different languages, who come to the website. We have probably about 500,000 people in a month, and that's from all over the world. And we're talking the Spanish-speaking, we are talking about you know, the Middle East, we're talking about China. It's really very exciting to me to see that, for instance, you can tell as world events are so topsy-turvy. But what's really interesting is you can tell what countries are going through a spiritual revolution. And in the top 10, who do we see? We see China is in the top 10. We see India in the top 10 who come to the website. And we also see Russia. And so I actually think what we're seeing is something very amazing, because these people would not be searching for this type of spiritual information if they weren't ready for it. So it's very exciting to me to be able to see this. Now, why did people come to the website? And obviously, the NDErs go there because they want to know that they're not alone, that what they experienced is really real. We have a lot of people who come to the website because they have had somebody who recently passed over, and they're looking for some measure of comfort or some measure of knowledge. We also have many people who are in the process of dying, and so these people want to know what is the afterlife, what is it all about. We also have many researchers who come. Oh, we have tons of media. And a lot of times they're doing this research so that they can report to their readers or wherever to get this information out. So we have a lot of researchers who come. We also have people who are just curious. We have a lot of people who come to the website. It's near and dear to my heart. Those people who are seeking spirituality, who are looking for love, who are looking for hope. And we also have a community. We have a forum for like-minded people to get together and talk. I thought it would be helpful so that to share our philosophy mission with you. And I think it's important that people understand that this really is a public service. And if enough people read about love, peace, and hope, maybe they can change to become more loving, compassionate people. We can then change the world to become a better place, like heaven on earth, as above, so below. Okay, here's what we do. The website is the largest one in the world of its kind, the largest NDE website. We are, anytime you Google it, we're usually between 1 and 3. We don't pay for advertisement. We're there because people want to see us. And so some of the things I'll point out to you is that we have the most important part is really the NDE stories. The NDErs who come to the website and they share their stories with us. And then when we turn around and we post those stories. Because one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that by sharing the story, by giving the story a voice, not only does it help that person as far as changing and being more interactive with the world, the experiencer themselves, but it also really affects everybody who reads it. So that person is a beacon of light when they come to the website and they share their story. And so it's our honor to be able to put those up on the website and share them with the rest of the world. And we have, again, I said we're just 10 short of 3,900 experiences. That's a lot of experiencers, and they're from all over the world. I would say that we probably get, I would say, between 1/4 and 1/3 of our website traffic is actually from other countries in different languages. We have people also, we have a forum, a bulletin board, we have a Facebook presence. We also have the bookstore where we try to put as many NDE books to make them available. They usually come through Amazon, but at least by looking at what's in the bookstore, you can get kind of an idea of what's out there. We also have something. What's really interesting about the website is people are really amazing. And when, for instance, has anybody seen that show where Jim Carrey, he does the Yes Man? Has anybody seen that yet? Okay. And what's really interesting is I've noticed that I have sort of adopted that attitude. And basically, what he does is anybody who says something to him, he pretty much says yes. Because one of the first things, and I've been guilty of this too, is you want to say no. No, I can't do that. Can't possibly do that. But what's really interesting is because of saying yes all the time, that's one of the reasons that the website has grown so large. Is because people come and they have ideas, they come with synchronicities. It's just amazing. Like for instance, if it's time to do something, I'll have like 2 or 3 people from different places say, hey, I'd like to see this, I'd like to see that. And you know that Spirit is talking and it's time to do a particular thing. And one of the things that happened was the ebook, the NDERF ebook. And we had a gal from Germany who had suggested it, and then a fellow from Canada pitched in, and pretty soon we have a resource for people to be able to download it onto their Kindle, or to be able to a Nook in a PDF format, or onto their tablet or their Mac. And they don't need access to the internet. They can take it anywhere, they can read it anywhere. And it's marvelous because there's a lot of near-death experiences on there, and people can just read them at their leisure. They don't need to be hooked up to the Wi-Fi to do it. We also have book reviews, we have web links, we have a presence on the videos through the YouTube. We have audio, which is through Vimeo. We also have some beautiful NDE artwork, just spectacular. And we also have some NDE poetry. And so I would encourage any of you, if you are, if you like to, if you have art, or if you like poetry and you'd like to submit it, share it with us. I'd be happy to post it. Come on. Okay. Now, this is really an interesting story, and this is an example of our synchronicities that I was talking about. And I wasn't quite sure why this was important, but I had a fellow last week, and he was from, his name is Ulrich, and he's from Denmark. And he said, hey, I want to share this article that I did with you on Joan of Arc. And I read it and I said, wow, that's really cool. Because what he did was he took an experience, obviously historical, and he had taken that experience and he applied the Grayson scale to it. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Grayson scale, Bruce Grayson is a doctor. He's one of the leading NDE researchers from the University of Virginia. And he came up with a psychological tool called the Grayson scale. It shows how in-depth a person's NDE is based upon how many of the elements they had of a near-death experience. And what he did is he says, hey, look at this, Joan of Arc had 7. You know, and usually a 7 or above is really getting up there to a deep experience, because a lot of people may just have an out-of-body experience. Some people may have more. But I wrote him and I said, you know, I really appreciate the effort that you went through to be able to share this with me. I think it's great. But the problem is, and I'm not trying to be an NDE snob, or snobbery, it has absolutely nothing to do with that. Basically, the website is sort of caught in a web, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to satisfy the, we're a scientific website. And since we have such big visibility, we have to pretty much remain as scientific as possible in order to be able to bring about a new paradigm. Because really there is no agreement on what is a near-death experience and what is not a near-death experience. And NDERF, what we use, is called a lucid experience associated with perceived consciousness apart from the body, occurring at the time of actual or threatened imminent death. And what we found when we use that for scientific purposes is that the experiences normally have a tendency to be pretty wide. The elements and what happens are really wide. But when you focus on an experience that is closer to death, that has that imminent death associated with it, what happens is you get a very narrow band of experiences. And that means that by doing that, you're actually showing to the scientists that, hey, we have a new paradigm here. You can't explain this away. And so by doing that, maybe we can get the scientists to actually come on board into the realm of spirituality. But I want to emphasize and Diane and I, we were having this talk, that really, the classification of what you call something like this, seriously, does not matter, because it is a spiritual experience that happens to a person, and it's all extremely valuable to that person, and also to the lives that those people teach and those people touch. And so it really is not so much the idea that it is a NDE or it isn't. But one of the things Diane and I were talking about yesterday, which I thought was actually a really cool idea, is rather than classifying the experience according to its elements and whether somebody actually dies or not, it would be really cool to see somebody classify experiences according to how much they change or how much they affect the person. And that way it's a lot more of an inclusive type of classification, because what we're doing here is not simply about science. It's actually transitioned over to being about spirituality. And by doing that, we need to address things a little bit differently than just towards science. So that's kind of an idea. If any of you want to take that project on, just let me know. Okay. Okay. The next section that I'm going to talk about has to do with where we come from and who we are. And part of the reason that I think it is so important that we understand this is because it helps us to be able to see the world in a very different way, so that we're not consumed with fear, so that we have the power to change anything that we want. And so the question is, what is the nature of the universe? And if you read the near-death experiences, the natural state of the universe is unconditional love. And it's not a trite thing. It truly is unconditional love. That really is the theory of everything. That is the theory that hooks everything together. It's a universal matrix. And it has the components of love. It has the telepathic communication, universal knowledge, multidimensionality. It shows that we are immortal and that we have the ultimate creativity. And so it's very cool to show. We have an NDE from a fella who was from the United Kingdom, and he died at the age 20 from a motorcycle accident. And I'm going to share his story, and you know, I know sometimes it gets a little boring when somebody just sits there and reads to you, but what I want you to listen to, I can't put words into his mouth, but what he was explaining was so profound, because it talks about how people communicate on the other side, how they feel connected, so that in the very beginning, during the hug session, it wasn't just about feeling that connection and unity that you don't normally get on the street. But he actually takes and puts that into like an otherworldly context. So, Peter N. As I became aware of this state of complete peace, and to recognize it for what it was, I started to look around me. All around me were various colored lights that I called stars. These stars were conscious beings. The entire universe was completely and utterly aware. All of the very space itself was permeated with consciousness. I seemed to regard this as entirely natural and in sync with my feeling of being home and now completely safe. Every single burden that I had ever known was gone. I was now lying in space among these beings that I seemed to know so very, very well. I had known them for an eternity. I became aware that all these stars were in communication with each other. They were all talking to each other. The communication system that is entirely different from anything that I have ever experienced before or since. The communication system there is one of direct transference of thought and feeling, where everything happens simultaneously. All of the communicating star beings become one and the same. I could see every single one of the star beings was in this state of communication with all of the others. The thing that is difficult to describe is that as I was a party to this communication system, I knew and could feel deep inside of me all that was going on in terms of the thought feeling. He always puts thought feeling together because he couldn't come up with the appropriate term. But in terms of the thought feeling that I was permeating the very universe that I was lying in, there were literally hundreds of these stars that were talking to each other all at the same time. Yet there was not one single bit of clash of the thought feeling, not one single bit of misunderstanding of thought feeling. There was no beings transmitting anything other than absolute truth. My sense is it would be impossible to lie or create misunderstandings there. Then he goes on to explain, this entire communicative sequence was started by one individual star. I became aware of where I was and what was going on around me. I looked at this star and it said, communicating to all the others, what? Look, here he is now. He's back with us again. He's here now. As I looked at that initiating individual star, I knew that all the other near stars already knew that I was there. They knew the message of the individual star, they knew their own responses, and they knew my feelings as this ripple of communication of thought feeling spread out and around and back again. I do not know how long I was drifting in the area of space. It could have been minutes, it could have been forever. I neither knew nor cared about time. The stars let me know that they knew me and that they were happy to see me again. They were so very, very happy that I was back with them to join them again. They also let me know that they loved me very, very much. This communication was one massive stream of music that played in the very fabric of the space that I was in, that moved through me and from me and back to them. I was in such a state of joy to be with them again. At the same instant of this communication, I was also aware of the metamind, of the communication as a unified and completely non-conflicted whole. There were many sensations all at once. I felt welcomed, loved, back home again, at ease, nurtured, and caressed. I felt their acceptance of my love for them, having them inside me and me inside them. I could feel their extreme intelligence and wisdom and the extent of their knowing of the fundamental nature of things. I blissfully stayed among these beings, being welcomed and loved by them. I mean, think about it. Can you imagine actually being able to be up in a space and have that kind of connection and know that you are a part of this wondrous universe? I mean, that's just mind-blowing. It's so hard for us to understand that because we're so separate here in individual bodies. So, what does it mean to be human? And who are we really? And I think that it's really instructive. A lot of you in the NDE arena have probably heard of Plato's Cave. But for those of you who haven't heard about Plato's Cave, what's really interesting is it parallels the near-death experience so well, in that the people in the cave, they had never seen the sunlight, they had always been in the cave, and they defined their reality by the shadows that they saw that were coming from the light. They never saw the light, but they would see the shadows. So that's all they defined their reality by. And we sort of do that here, because we live in the shadows. We never get to see the ultimate heaven from this aspect, unless we have a spiritually transformative event or a near-death experience. And unless we have those types of experiences that give us these glimpses. But for the most part, we come here, we've got our hands tied behind our back, and we're supposed to learn something. And you kind of go, well, okay, what possibly am I here to do? And it turns out that the reason that we're here on earth is to learn about the different lessons of love. Sounds simple. And it sounds a little bit daunting if you really think about it. Because what is love? I mean, really, what is it? Is it something you know when you see? Is it something that many people, they have no idea what love is? A lot of people will liken it to a maternal instinct, how a parent will feel towards a child. A lot of people will liken love to that romantic attachment. But really, what is love? And when you read what the NDErs say about love, love is actually something that we can't really fully comprehend here. And it's like trying to describe the color red to a blind person, or a blind person trying to describe it. I mean, there's just sort of like this disconnect. But yet we're here on earth to learn lessons of love. And one of the reasons that we do that, and one of the reasons we're pretty much handicapped when we come here with our hands tied behind our backs, and part of that reason is because we can't really appreciate what unconditional love is unless we know what the opposite is. And I think that's why we're here on earth. I mean, we definitely see the opposite here, but there are so many tremendous stories of people who have tremendous love and who they do so many compassionate things for people, like Mother Teresa. You know, you see these glimpses of pure heaven here on earth. And so, who are we really? Well, you heard me talk about it. We're immortal. Think about that. That is such an amazing thing. I mean, we don't really sit and in our everyday life say, I'm immortal. You don't normally do that. But you know what? We are. And not only are we immortal, but we are those beings who are one with the universe. That is our true nature. That's who we are. We have all knowing, all knowledge. We have all communication. We can travel vast distances with just a thought. We can create any kind of reality. Heck, if we want to go to the other side, we can actually have our own earth because we can create it. So we are very, very powerful people. We can do anything that we want. So it's just a matter of waking up our inner selves to be able to create that heaven on earth. Because we can do it. We have that power. Well, I promised you that I was going to talk a little bit about fear. And a lot of it isn't really a pleasant part of the talk. But what it does do is it helps people to kind of understand what we're up against. That's how we understand our earthly reality. And I heard an interesting definition of fear. And this person, he says, it's what you're holding on to, what you're attached to, what you're afraid of losing. I went, huh, now that's kind of interesting. And so one of the things that in Gavin de Becker's book, The Gift of Fear is actually a survival mechanism. It is of the human body, And it actually served a function to keep us alive and keep us unharmed. And even to this day, it still works that way, because that's who the body is. But on the other hand, having too much fear produces mental, emotional, and physical disorders that severely hamper our quality of life. And fear is a killer. It begins where your power ends. Holding on to fear shuts down the body, and it kills the vital life force. So it's very important that we understand what fear is and how to overcome fear. Many times, fear can be cured just through simple education. And many times, overcoming fear is just a matter of changing the perspective from a victim mentality to one that is one of empowerment. Basically, fear is a negative emotion, and I don't know how many of you are aware of Daniel Goleman. He's a really amazing, his books are amazing. He wrote a book in conjunction with the Dalai Lama on negative emotions. And fixating on negative emotions actually turns out to be a mental habit, because part of our consciousness stream, the way that the brain works, part of that way the brain works is it has probably about 90% of our behaviors are all habit. And that was to allow the extra 5 to 10% of the brain to stay alert for any kind of changes. And that is how we evolved. But fixating on negative emotions and worry, anxiety, that is a mental habit. And so what they talk about in that book is how to control fear. And the easiest way to do it is to train your brain. And the way that they recommend that you do it, because generally what happens is people will fixate on a negative emotion and it just keeps going and going. And not only does it keep going, but it escalates. And pretty soon it's this big, raw sore. And one of the things that happens is that sore, even though you know, as people, we may forget about it for a month or two, when they're put back in the same situation, they're really reactive. And it goes back to the time of the wounding. And so one of the ways to train the brain is when you first start to notice or even have a glimpse of that thought coming into the brain, switch it. Think of something about love. Think of what we did in the very beginning, that love and connection. Change it. And even though this may be really hard to do, you'll notice that after a period of time that you won't have that thought anymore, because you will have replaced it by something very positive. And as you keep doing that with each negative thought, you actually become a much more spiritual person, and you're more open to all this eternal love coming in to your life. Because as you think, you attract the things that you think about. So if you're thinking about love, you're going to attract a lot more love into your life, which is a very exciting way to do it. Now, this is kind of fun, because you are the first people to be able to see this. And what this is we have the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation. We have some science to go behind this. And this is off of our new experience. This is off of our new website. And this represents a series of 823 consecutive NDEs from the new survey that started in 2011. And out of those, 419 of those were Grayson scores 7 and above. And as I said earlier, when you do that, you seem to get a very cohesive group of experiences to be able to study. And as such, this is really exciting, because what you have here is how accurately do the NDErs remember the experience in comparison to other life events that occurred around the time of the experience. And 94.3 NDErs remembered the event either the same or greater than earthly events around the time of the experience, with 80.2% remembering the NDE more than anything that happens here on Earth. And consequently, 85% of these experiencers consider the event definitely real, and only 5.3% of the experiencers found the reality of the experience doubtful or definitely not real. But after integrating the experience, that number increases to 93.1% definitely real, with only 2.2% who were doubtful about the reality of their near-death experience. And I think this is really exciting because it's important, because not only does this reduce fear through the reality of remembering who we are, but it can also account for the large changes that we see as after effects in the near-death experience. And look at these changes. Look at what happens with these changes. You have changes here that have to do with just the general changes, large changes in my life, 55.4%. That's really pretty remarkable, but because how many experiences, single experiences in anybody's life will be able to change them as much as a near-death experience? It's a positive change, more than it changes more than virtually any other single experience on Earth. And so they are worthy of being totally studied and accepted, and it's very exciting. Another thing that happens is you'll notice that the religious and spiritual beliefs, they change 56.6% as a result of the experience. Relationships change 55.4%. And the values and the beliefs of the NDErs change 70.2%. It's just phenomenal. When they were asked whether the NDErs have a sense of purpose and a direction from knowing why they are on Earth, they started at about 50% as life being possibly meaningful and significant, to not significant or unknown prior to their experience. But then after the experience, those numbers, they jump up to 87.4% as lives being probably or definitely meaningful and significant. I'll tie this together because I know a lot of people, you know, they hear numbers, they go, phew. But I'll tie it all together, I promise you. This is for the scientists. We'll do the other part in a minute. Is there an afterlife? Well, look at the responses. Before the experience, the NDErs, almost 51% of the experiencers were uncertain, doubtful, or adamant that an afterlife does not exist. Yet, after their experience, 93% believe in an afterlife, with 84.2% of those people being absolutely certain that an afterlife exists. Now, look at, this is a neat contrast, the fear of death versus the fear of living. What did they have to say? Before the NDEs, 58.8% of experiencers were moderately or greatly afraid of death. But after their NDE, almost 88% of the NDErs only slightly fear death or do not fear death at all, with 76.4% who don't fear death at all. NDErs had about 40% who moderately or greatly feared living their earthly life. Yet after their NDE, 86.1% are slightly or not fearful at all at living their lives. That's a tremendous change regarding fear. Another area that was very important had to do with spirituality and religious practices. Now, after years of studying the near-death experience, I define religion, being religious, and being spiritual a little bit differently. And to me, spirituality is maintaining that loving connection with God. And religious is probably more in keeping with the church teachings, but here they're lumped together because ultimately they're both spiritually related. And 56.6% of the NDErs report that their religious spiritual practices significantly changed as a result of the experience. And the importance of their spiritual religious life, moderately to greatly important, it jumped from 41.6%, almost doubling, up to 86.4%. And the answers of slightly to not important declined from 51.8% way down to 11.5%. Another interesting finding has to do with compassion towards others. And the NDErs, initially, they started off, they said that they were slightly or not compassionate. They started at 28.7, and the numbers went up to greatly or moderately compassionate towards others of 96.7%. That is just truly remarkable, the lessons that the NDErs have to teach us. And relationships also correspondingly change because they're more loving people, they're more giving, and they surround themselves with more loving and giving people. So it's really not surprising that 55.4% changed as a result of the experience. So now, summing it all up, what does this mean? Well, most of you will probably sit there and laugh and say, hey, I already knew that. I didn't need numbers to prove that. But, okay, here's what it means. Unequivocally, you can tell any kind of a scientist that NDEs are more real than our earthly reality. There is an afterlife. NDErs are dramatically changed to reflect their new understandings they gained from their experience. Fear is greatly diminished, and NDErs become much more spiritual, loving, compassionate, and willing to help others. So the next part has to do with living without fear. And basically the top 10 generally things, you know, it sort of changes depending on what site you go to. But number one is the fear of flying. Some people said it was the fear of going to the dentist. People are afraid of public speaking. That's a big one. Number two, people have a fear of heights. They have a fear of the dark. They have a fear of intimacy. Number 6, fear of death. Number 7, fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of spiders, and fear of commitment. So another one that I would add is lately we're seeing a big fear of the end times. And I'll address that. In order to live without fear, we need to understand more about what we fear. And as you can see, there are a lot of things that people, that they're afraid of. As you notice that all except for maybe possibly spiders can be cured from realizing that this earth is a temporary illusion and that we really are immortal beings. Again, the cure is love, knowledge, and empowerment. It's interesting that there was a study that was recently done. His name is Christopher Bader. He's from Chapman University. And October 5th, 2014, they came out with a study about fear with about 1,500 people. And it's interesting to know that 2 factors seem to make people more afraid in general. And those factors were relatively little education and too much television. So anyways, but what's interesting also is that fear seems to lead to paralysis. And when people are afraid, he says, that Fear might lead them to support initiatives such as Let's Stop All Flights to Africa, but it doesn't seem to lead people to change in their day-to-day lives. The fear campaign doesn't tend to work as well as they would hope in terms of motivating action and preparedness, but some of the team's other findings were more disturbing, such as many respondents reported being afraid of natural disasters, yet relatively few said that they had an emergency kit at home or to help them weather such disasters. And so despite a lot of fear, there's very little preparation that people actually do. And yet, it's very interesting that by its very nature, preparation will directly reduce fear. Another thing that people may have wondered about are apocalyptic visions. And what's interesting is that in Ken Ring's book, Heading for Omega, the weakest link is probably the apocalyptic visions. And the reason being is, back in 1964, hey, the world is ending right now. But you know what? We're still here. And it's been like 40 years later. And so people, so some skeptics, they would say, the NDErs, they saw something that didn't happen, so obviously NDEs are false. But you know what? That's pretty linear thinking if you think about it. Because nobody really knows why NDErs have an experience, why some people have it, and why some people don't. And personally, I believe that people who die and have a near-death experience, that I think that everybody who dies or comes close to death, that they may actually wind up on the other side. It's only some people that are able to remember it. Memory is a real key to the near-death experience. And I think that the data shows that there's a high emphasis on spiritual changes and increased spirituality in living their lives. And it points to the near-death experience being a spiritual experience. And so this probably means that for one reason or another, through your own individual contract before you were incarnated on this earth, however it is, for whatever reason, this idea of needing fear, needing to experience fear, or living according to this apocalyptic vision, for whatever reason, it is necessary for that individual's spiritual growth. And the way that I look at it is that, you know, here we are, we're in this particular three-dimensional reality, in this particular three-dimensional time. But when people go to the other side, they are not confined to this particular three-dimensional reality. So it's highly possible that they can see apocalyptic visions. We just don't know. It may not be this reality and this particular time, but it's necessary for them so that they can experience whatever they need to experience here on Earth. And we do have the free will and the ability to alter our reality with our minds, and our love connects us to the greater reality. So, a paradigm shift. How do we survive in an uncertain, chaotic world? And I think the first thing is to educate yourself. Everybody should learn as much as they possibly can, and to actually become aware of what's happened or what's happening out there. You don't have to get upset or afraid or worry about it. Just say, okay, well, this is happening, so this is how I'm going to prepare for it, and this is how I'm going to help others to prepare for it. Remember who you are. This really isn't for you. You know, the fear is not for you. How you react to it, that is the important question. Find your passion and find your spirituality, because really in chaotic times, remembering who you are And doing these things that fulfill your life are so much more important now than ever before. Part of the message of the NDEs is the tremendous compassion for others, helping others in a way to actualize love, reduce fear, and empower others. One of the interesting things is that by becoming love in action, some of the things that we may notice is that helping others has sort of like a particular dynamic to it. And for instance, when people form groups, the maximum groups where people get the most out of a group is the number of 112 people. For some reason, that is an optimal group. So when you go out there and you may want to create a group to do this or that, then think about 112. Think about that number. Another thing is thinking about, well, how do we organize our communities? What is the optimum number for communities? And it turns out that it's about 100,000. And that allows people to work the best together to get things done and to make it economically work so that it does benefit the people. A resilient community, I've always been really fascinated by this because of Katrina. And a resilient community has its basis, the recommendations has its basis in studying the natural disasters and what helps communities bounce back. And New Orleans, after Katrina, it actually provides a really good example because there were many wards that bounced back. And primarily the reason, there's actually several reasons, but a lot of it is down south, they have people called Cajuns. And these are like the French Catholics that were disenfranchised from Europe. And they came over to Nova Scotia. They did so well at their farming techniques on the rocky coast, and they had beautiful gardens. And so the British said, oh gosh, you're doing so good, we want your land. And so again, the Cajuns, they were disenfranchised. And as people may realize, Louisiana is basically a bunch of parishes. And part of that is because it has some Catholic roots. And so the Cajuns actually came down from Nova Scotia, and the parish, they said, hey, if you come down here and work this land, we'll give you a mule and we'll give you several acres. So sure enough, they came down. But the Cajuns are really interesting in that they have they're so close-knit as a community that even their families, they don't move like even 25 miles away from their family. They're all right there. So what it tends to do is it creates a culture where people have these strong community roots. They have the families that are really close-knit, and because of that, these communities are able to bounce back. And so when you think about maybe groups, you might say, okay, well, how do we make this community more resilient? And it is by making them feel more connected and becoming a part of something bigger. On the other hand, you look at the 9th Ward, and the 9th Ward, they had broken families, they had broken relationships. I mean, it's really tragic. And there, they still have blighted areas where there's just all these houses. You go through New Orleans, and there's just all these houses that have gone through that are all moldy and all this. They're just there. Nobody lives in them, and so it's very important as far as survival goes, is being able to create these communities. And I'll tell you, one of the reasons that I'm here, and one of the reasons that I'm really excited to be here, is to share an experience that I had. And I don't know how many of you remember this, but I saw that Ned Doherty had come and talked to you because he's an NDEr. He was down in Florida, and I don't know if he was actually part of the mafia or if he had mafia ties. Either way, mafia's there somewhere. And he came to tell us about his change from the near-death experience. And in Seattle IANDS, I was sitting there in the groups, just like you're sitting there, and he turns on the tape recorder. And as he turns it on, there is this prayer to St. Michael. Okay, no big deal, you know, you get meditation, you just sit there and you just zen. And all of a sudden, I get this wave of energy, it just goes bang! And I'm just like going, what happened? You know, it was just bizarre. Because it was enough energy to knock me halfway out of my body. And what was really weird is then I get like this data download. It was just like data, packets of data just being shoved into my brain. And I was like going, you know, what? And so anyways, afterwards, I knew something had happened, but I wasn't quite sure what it was. And then throughout like 2 or 3 days, and I think it's just the way that our consciousness will processes these types of experiences. But a lot of times, especially if you're in an earthly reality, and then all of a sudden you get access to all this spiritual information, it just it unfolded. And as it unfolded, I would see things in glimpses. I'd see little pieces here and there. And then finally, I have a dream, you know, like about 3 or 4 days later. And what I see that's really exciting is I see the earth. It's this beautiful, beautiful blue earth, you know, with the green. It's just a beautiful color, and it's a beautiful, peaceful place. And what is really exciting about this is I see these things that look like soap bubbles. And I'm like going, now that's kind of weird. But you know, like they're over big regions of places. And then I was told that these soap bubbles, what they represent are people who are praying. And that membrane is where the prayers of people go, because it's actually a dimension. It's like a place where things can happen. You know, it's like a membrane of creation that is accessible to us. So groups of people, they come together, and during their prayers go up into this bubble. And not only is it us that are doing the praying all over the world, because there's soap bubbles all over the world, but also there are entities from the other side who are praying. So you've got interdimensional creation happening in these soap bubbles. And I thought that was such a really cool experience, and I thought that it was really appropriate to share, because it shows that we have the power to do whatever we want to create that wave of love and that wave of positive spiritual vibration for the rest of the world. It's just a matter of getting together and getting in groups and doing that. And so, just to give you some ideas, just, you know, because really it's about becoming love in action. That's why most people came down here. Although on the other hand, there are groups that they get together, and I call them the light holders, because just holding that spirituality in love and light is enough to bring about a change in the planet. So if you see a lot of chaos or a lot of unrest, and a bunch of light holders, they get together in prayer, they can raise that vibration so that there will be peace and there will be love. And that's a very powerful concept. And so doing compassionate acts, as you can tell, the NDErs, it's just amazing. They come back and, you know, that 90-something%. I mean, these are people who have touched. They've actually put their finger in the socket of God, you know, and they're able to come back, and they're able to effect this love and this change because they've directly been there. And so they really need to be, and the people with the spiritual experiences, you know, sharing this with the rest of the world. Another thing that is very helpful, especially given that our food supply and our water supply, we need to get back. Even if you read a lot of the NDEs on NDERF, you'll notice that there's actually several of them that talk about us starving to death. Why? Because the food supply has been poisoned and it's been genetically modified. And so getting back to the basics, community gardens are a great idea because not only do people get healthy, sustainable food, but they also get that community within the group. You're able to affect things, change with children. They're great at gardening. They love to play in the dirt, let me tell you. And you know, another thing is the wellness centers. And even if you don't call it a wellness center, just the fact that people get together and they may address spiritual things or spiritual issues. They may address mental issues, which is a really big deal. We need so much more love on this earth, and I really think that that could solve a lot of the mental issues and the disenfranchised that we see that happen with so many people. Another thing is, you know, for emotional reasons or even physical fitness, you know, taking personal responsibility for keeping our bodies healthy. The healthier we are, the easier it is for us to connect with our spirit and be able to connect with other people. So maintaining the body as a physical vessel of love really does help you be able to connect with the spirit. Some other ideas. Believe it or not, there's a lot of people that have come to the website trying to say, hey, I want to be involved in hospice. And right now, the state of hospice is really something where people come to the hospice and they mirror back at them. They don't, you know, obviously you don't want to be proselytizing to somebody who's getting ready to pass over. I mean, I would be just livid if somebody tried to do that to me. But, you know, it's like, what really needs to happen is we have several people, and so I know that its time has come. But if people act as, instead of like birth coaches, if they act as, you know, death coaches, and help people to realize that this is an exciting journey that they are going on, and help prepare them, or work with you know, terminally ill patients, and being able to, you know, let them know that there is something else out there. For instance, like there's a hospice in San Francisco, and it is more of a Zen type of a hospice. So people kind of get an idea that it's going to be a little bit different than somebody just mirroring back at them. You'll be an active participant. So I think that's a really great idea. I have a lot of people who are interested in it, but I haven't. Every once in a while you get a volunteer that just is really gung-ho and they just take off. And from one idea, you get a tremendous amount of synchronicity that goes with it. Some other things that are near and dear to my heart, animals. Animals are basically, I believe that most animals are there to teach us lessons about love because they have unconditional love. And so they help train their owners or their masters or the people they come in contact with. And so I've always looked at, for instance, in New Orleans, they have a pit bull rescue called Villa Lobos. And they are pit bulls and parolees. And it's amazing that in New Orleans they have these pit bulls, but the problem is they can't adopt these dogs out because the insurances won't cover the house insurances. And so a lot of these dogs get put down. And I would love to see somebody take on something along the lines of training these dogs as service dogs, and then making sure that the laws say, hey, you can't turn down a service dog for any reason. You know, something like that. Just making things better for other people and for the animals and caring on the planet. And so a lot of people come to the website, and what they do is they will ask me questions like, gee, I really want to work in NDE, but I need a paid position. And, you know, because they got to pay the bills, you know, but they really want to work in this kind of an arena. And what I tell them is that it's really rare that you're going to find something in this area, at least at this time, that will actually pay. But what you can do is you can do indirectly, you can find those things that will pay. And part of it is creating the groups, creating the community, and then you attach it to something. Like for instance, if somebody is a student and they want to get their doctorate, they really are interested in NDEs, but obviously NDE research, it's rare that you can get it to pay. There are some exceptions, but you know. One of the things that they can do is they can study compassion. You know, what makes people compassionate? What makes communities resilient? Why would we want them to be resilient? You know, there are indirect ways of helping people and spreading love, regardless of anyways. That's just something that you can think about. Because it's very important that even though you can't monetize the NDE directly, you can do it through the values and the principles that the NDErs talk about, and you'll still be living a very spiritual and very fulfilling and passionate life. So, ta-da. Questions?
Going back to the beginning, 10 minutes.
Okay.
The little drawing in the very first slide you had about Joan of Arc.
Yeah.
Was that little drawing Joan of Arc or the guy?
The guy had drawn a picture of what he thought she would look like.
He didn't see her? I
No,
thought, oh,
it's
did.
here. He just said, "This is what I think she looks like," and he drew it. So I don't know. Yes.
Now, is he practicing law or not?
No, not really.
How was the transition?
The transition was, law is really a very dark field, really dark. And it's really unusual that you can get some kind of spiritual fulfillment out of fighting all the time. The reason that I got fulfillment is because I was helping families stay together, and I was a family law lawyer, and a lot of times, you know, you got to step up to the plate if you're trying to protect the children. But, you know, you get older, you just kind of go, come on, there's got to be more to life than this. And so that's part of the reason. And then when I was practicing on the Navajo reservation and working in Gallup, New Mexico as a prosecutor, it was so bad that I just said, you know what, I really give up. I do not need to fight anymore. I mean, when I sat there and I was sitting there and I was yelling and screaming back at the judge, I mean, I was just like a defense lawyer. I was just like yelling and I was screaming, and then I went, that's not me. And I walked out and I said, you know what? I don't want to be lowered anymore like that. It's not me, and I need something better. And I quit the next day. So, yeah.
It's quite interesting of all these changes that have developed. And so it's obvious that there's been a pathway through the forest, opened up a pathway into one's life for those changes. Do you have any other plans of how these pathways can open up for people who haven't had near-death experiences? I'm thinking of ways of looking into how therapists may be able to utilize and open up pathways for what people with who have had NDEs make the change in their life, maybe through therapy. And also, have you looked into, you say relationships, more detailed relationships, like what was your relationship like with your spouse before this time? How has it changed with your spouse? How has it changed has it changed at all with with your people that you had disagreements with. How much has it changed? And see if there's a relationship on degrees also, getting into more detail.
Yeah. Well, I think part of it is, that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this talking, is because I'm so excited by the findings of NDERF, you know, those findings from 823 NDErs. And there's clearly something there. And really, if we can inspire our scientists to take a look at that, I really think that they'll find some really neat things that they can do.
Okay.
Yes?
Thank you.
On the question, there are some spiritual paths that would say that fear is an illusion. Fear is something that's really attached to, like you said, survival in this place. And so it has that purpose. And that really there is no opposite to love. That love is all there really is. But the ego and fear blocks that perception.
Mm-hmm. No, that's true. Is there a question?
Well, yeah, the question was, because you said, I think I heard you say that, basically, you know, that fear was, or something to the effect that the opposite of love is what you had said, something like that. And
Well, actually, I think contempt is the ultimate opposite of love. But fear is something that keeps us from love.
There's the concept that since love is all there is,
Mm-hmm.
that we're either extending love or calling it.
Okay.
So whenever you see someone who's angry or doing something that's really at a place that's kind of, you know, not the opposite of love or contempt, they're really calling on love.
And I think that's generally true. I mean, a lot of the personality disorders and a lot of the things that people do that are so mean and negative, it really is part of that, you know, because they lack love. So how are you going to appreciate love if you don't know what love isn't? You know, because we come from a place of 100% love. I mean, that's the way that a lot of people look at it. Anybody else? Yes, I see. Whoops.
Right here?
Yeah.
First of all, I have a great respect for numerology, and today being December 13, 12, 13, in the year 2014, a lot of people are getting married so they can remember their wedding date, 12, 13, 14. But I saw up on the screen the near-death experiences that you had, and the number 419 is my birthday. And so I immediately took to heart, but that was just a statement. My question is, has there been any research or any kind of connotation between near-death experience and past life regressions? Have there been people that have had former lives that have talked about that and where and how it might be able to relate to some of the experience they're having with near-death?
We do get some people that talk about the continuity of life and the fact that this is not their first rodeo. And so, you know, implicit in that is that there are prior lifetimes. Once in a while, we'll have somebody talk about a prior lifetime. But for the most part, I think for the most part, people that go to the other side, they're trying to understand why they're on in this lifetime. And the knowledge of any other lifetimes or any other beings that are part of their soul group, that knowledge is only if it is directly relevant to their spiritual growth here at this time on this earth plane. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, kind of it does. It's just like relearning life experiences over and over, like, you know, having the same situations that consistently happen while we're here, learning those lessons and being aware of maybe something that happened in a prior lifetime that maybe we don't learn it this time around, you know. We may have to come back and do it again. You know, that and I was just wondering if there was any kind of connotation to that. Because one would like to feel that when we're finished with this particular lifetime, we go on to a better evolution, to something, you know, more profound.
Well, we do have that in the out-of-body experience research foundation. We do have that kind of, we have a lot of people that will talk about it. But for some reason, it's not really in the NDEs, not that much. And, yeah.
Your comment about, you made a comment that people lack love. My understanding is that nobody lacks love, really, that we are here to express the love that we are. That's all we are, and people have blockages to expressing that.
And that's a good way to put it. I mean, that's really good. It's very consistent. It's pretty much the same thing, only different words. That's the same thing.
I think if people realize that's all we are, and that love can heal any condition if we can just express who we are, which is love.
Mm-hmm. That's a good thought. Good thought. Thank you. We're about done? About done? Okay. Well, thank you so much. I can answer more questions as we go out here.